Hello, everybody. I am Jeremy Agnew. I'm the host of the GrimDark History podcast, where we explore the intersection between history and fiction. This episode is part two of a two-part bonus episode that I did just celebrating reaching 1,000 download milestone on my podcast. This is available everywhere you get your podcasts, so iTunes, Acast, Apple Store, all those places. It's available in all of them, and also YouTube if you're listening to this on the YouTube channel. In part one, if you wanted to listen to it, we went through the top 7 of the historical figures that fan favorites chose that the Emperor of Mankind might have been from the Warhammer 40,000 lore. If you'd like to, hop back and listen to that. We discussed that with my special guest host, Laura Whiteland from the Chaos Divided podcast. If you're just tuning in, we're just getting into the top 3, so these are the final 3 people as picked by the fans of the Warhammer 40,000 lore and the ones who responded and enjoy the show. So without further ado, let's get to the show. Thanks for listening, and if you enjoy, please subscribe and check in my other podcasts. Thank you.
There you go.
Alrighty, so into our top 3. The first in our top 3 in at number 3 is Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Lady herself. Yeah, so
I'm very excited for this one because this one fits in my mind.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie.
Me too. And this is one of those people I think you could do 3 or 4 podcast episodes just on her. But I'll go and we'll try to do justice to her. Lived from 1925 to 2014. She was 87 when she died. She was Prime Minister of the United Kingdom for 11 years between 1979 and 1990. She presided over a time of extreme transition in the UK from a heavily socialized society to more private ownership, increasing middle class wealth, home ownership in England significantly. She presided over the transition of the UK from an industrialized kind of 1800s focused economy to a more modernized 20th century one. Initial periods, obviously, when talking about the Thatcher years, is usually high unemployment, high interest rates, out of control inflation. But by the end of her tenure, it was really the opposite. There was low unemployment, low interest rates, low inflation. But the success of her policy still had a negative result on a lot of people in the UK. They suffered through the transition. And then, of course, there was the Falklands War with Argentina, which improved her popularity significantly. Some would say it saved her prime ministership. However, she was widely regarded to be one of the most amazing wartime prime ministers, and one of the few people in the history of the world to receive 2 separate knighthoods. What do you think of Mrs. Thatcher?
You know what? I think Margaret Thatcher both combined some of the pettiness of the Emperor. The Falklands War is a petty squabble.
What? Really?
Margaret Thatcher went so hard into. Which I don't know, the Emperor does that all the time. The Emperor definitely punitively punishes people for very minor transgressions. So yeah, I can that lends it to. But even if we talk about a heavily socialized economy, a lot of that was the post-war rebuilding period. So you had huge reconstruction. If you talk about income inequality, most Western countries, and the UK was not excluded from this, had massive income equality during the 1945 to 1970 period.
Yeah.
And a lot of that was a lot of your capitalist bourgeoisie class had been had their wealth wiped out by war. like physical capital, like the amount of factories that have been destroyed during the war, had really leveled the playing field. And Thatcher's really the one who just kind of like upends that completely, and really starts pushing the UK back to more of like an aristocratic society
Yeah.
that's like ruled by the wealthy, which very much fits with the emperor, because that, again, the emperor doesn't want to like the emperor wants to have people that are in place to like manage the day to day, and then can just like manipulate things. I can see like the only struggle with Thatcher isn't super like enduring of a figure, other than how hated she is.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. You know, there's not a lot of empire building. There's no religious element to it, but there is somebody who took a nation that was, just recovering from war, and then, completely falling apart, and then through the force of her will, you know, enforced her political will, saying, "This is my vision. It's going to work, and everybody's going to suffer through it. And at the end of the time of everybody's suffering, whoever's left standing is going to be better." And I feel like that kind of fits the emperor's long term vision of short term suffering, even if that suffering is a few years, is nothing compared to the long term success.
Yeah, but see, but this is also where the emperor is like economically, like the correction from like high interest rates, out of control inflation, like extreme unemployment, like that all was like happening on a macro level,
Mm-hmm.
and wasn't necessarily directly tied to her policies, but the amount of suffering she inflicted on like the like poorer people, and the amount of like opportunity she gave to wealthy people to like take power
Mm-hmm.
during that period, very like emperor-esque.
Sure.
Because like realistically, her policies are not what corrected those issues. Like they were tied to like historical mistakes in the 60s. Like the high inflation that she inherited, um, was, due to like the energy crisis. It was due to a lot of like bad like price control plans in the 60s. So it wasn't necessarily like her policies that corrected those issues. She just like deregulated enough that everyone was able to swoop in and kind of grab the money that was available. It was very similar to like what Reagan did, where it was more like just kind of like opened the floodgates of, all the systems that were there to like protect the, equality that had been achieved after the war. She dismantled all those systems and just kind of created like uh basically an all-you-can-eat buffet, which is again very similar to how like Terra functions in 40K, where there's like opulently wealthy individuals and then just like a giant pool of labor, which is kind of how the Emperor sees most people. Is just like potential verbs, that just people that do stuff for him.
Well, I mean, one of the things that she did do, you know, when we talk about this, is, at the start of her tenure, the government basically had no money. And in order to create money from the government, you got to create tax revenue. And in order to do that, she had to cut government spending. And then the creation of this, expanded middle class and upper middle class, this wealth of, that you were talking about, that generates tax revenue. So, I mean, even though a lot of people suffered, she did rebuild the government, because the government was basically bankrupt when she started, and at the end of her effort, all the tax revenue coming in from her policy changes, good or bad, created a government that had budget surplus that was able to do things.
Yeah, I just, the enduring impacts of like Margaret Thatcher's actions are still being felt now.
Oh, for sure.
So I mean, like,
She's a love or hate person, I think.
yeah, and I definitely think like, the Emperor occupies a lot of the same things. Yeah, I can see, talking about the emperor setting challenges for himself. I can see Margaret Thatcher being all right, again, how can I like test my political chops in a very difficult situation with kind of like the difficulty cranked, and yeah, I can see that being the emperor. So
So this was another civilization video game challenge. Where hard mode challenge. You're going to inherit a nation struggling and pull it out from.
yeah, like can I in a very short period of time can I dramatically change a like the remnants of a disembodied empire, and change it so dramatically in an 11-year period that it's almost unrecognizable from what it was before, operating as a woman in a period of like intense
Oh
sexism.
yeah.
I can see that as like the emperor being like, all right, how good am I at this, like coming out of like one of those like, okay, Bismarck was a challenge, but like Margaret Thatcher would be like talking about like political operating like operatives,
Yeah.
and like political chops. Like Thatcher operated in a way more intense environment.
Oh,
Like,
for sure.
um,
There's no
so yeah, I kind
autocracy
of
there.
exactly like Thatcher built those structures, um, in a lot of ways that like you know it's an interesting like talking about empire building. Like I see Thatcher as almost like rebuilding an aristocracy
Yeah.
in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
which again fits in with kind of like how the emperor operates and is like, okay, how fast can I do this? And realistically, Thatcher did it in a very short period of time. Like you have like 11 years for the amount of societal change the UK went through in that period, and like how lasting that has been
Yeah.
is like pretty profound. Um, and yeah, I can see that being a like the emperor's like, okay, how far can I push the human psyche of like almost like the perspective viewpoint like whiplash of like, okay, we're gonna go from like one very different direction to like the complete opposite as fast as possible.
I like it.
Yeah,
Alrighty. Who's number two in our list?
we've got Cyrus the Great, so founder of the first Persian Empire, uh I Theamenid Empire.
Achaemenid.
Achaemenid. Okay, I also can't read very well. My eyes are not great. Sorry. Which is the 20th largest empire ever in recorded history. Defeated the Medes, the one who destroyed the Assyrian Empire that had dominated Mesopotamia for about 700 years. Founded an empire that would stretch from modern day Pakistan all the way into Greece, around the Levant, Egypt, and North Africa. Considered a prophet in Jewish religion for being the one to free them from Babylonian captivity and rebuilt Jerusalem and the temple in Jerusalem. Persian influence from science, religion, mathematics, aesthetics, and architecture can be felt the world over, from Spain to China and Russia and throughout the Mideast and India. All right, you know what? I can see it.
Yeah. I can see it too. I thought this was a great pick. This one, I mean, when you want to talk about ancient empire building, um, it's hard to get bigger. We will get bigger, but it's hard to get bigger than the Achaemenid Empire, which I thought was great. I like this pick.
Yeah, and I mean, you're talking about a time period, so we're talking 600 BCE,
Yeah.
um, where realistically, again, you don't have necessarily a lot of like logistical support, and you have a lot of difficult geography. So it's a very like methodical expansion, but then also, yeah,
And,
I can see it
and
for sure.
and the geography is pretty crazy in this area because to be, Persian Empire starts in Iran, and to get from Iran into Iraq, you have to cross a giant mountain range called the
Mm.
Zagros Mountains, which I can only imagine would be it's difficult today when you have trucks and airplanes. I can't imagine trying to do it with marching an army thousand strong plus all your supply train to go from the Iranian lowland desert through the mountains and then into Iraq or Mesopotamia. That would be quite a trek just to get your army there. And then once you're there, then you still have to conquer all the lands. And yeah, it's crazy. And there's a huge, I mean, it's a massive empire when you look at it. I looked at it on the map and you think, oh, it's big. And then you start zooming in and go, Jesus, there's a giant mountain range here. Oh, Jesus, there's a giant mountain range here. There's an ocean here. How are you marching an army from one end to the other and keeping it? That's the thing. How do you keep it? That's crazy.
Well, even if you think like yeah, there is a lot of coast there, but it extends quite far inland as well. So yeah, it's just kind of a massive feat in a time when like there would have been like it would have been very difficult to pull that off. Like if you think of like the Roman Empire or like the Greek empires, or even like Carthage, they're largely bound by coastline, and this is very much an inland empire in a time when like even Mesopotamia was pretty much constrained to two rivers for the most part. Was where most of the power lied.
Yeah, so the Mesopotamia, like you said, was from, and tune into my series on this actually coming out in just a few days, but September 1. But this is, so Mesopotamia was from the Persian Gulf, so the southern end of Iraq, all the way up into what's Assyria today, and down along the Mediterranean coast. That was, and then parts of Anatolia. That was kind of Mesopotamia, kind of just before you hit the mountains there. But and for thousands of years, the extent of the Babylonian Empire was that little piece of land and into Egypt a little bit. And of course, you could only have kingdom along Egypt because you got the Nile, like you said, you got water to go up and down. This is the first one that, like you said, is hugely inland.
And that's really where like I think a lot and like you're crossing like these water boundaries, like they don't necessarily connect until you connect them. Um, so yeah, no, that's like it's insanely impressive considering the time period and like how fast sailing ships, like we're talking like trireme times where you're still generally like rowing ships
Yeah.
up and down like rivers and coastal areas. Like ocean travel is very difficult. Obviously the Suez Canal is not there, so like goods coming from Greece and trying to make it back to Persia are spending a lot of time like traveling over land. Like yeah, there was definitely, they probably had ways of like creating water crossings to simplify it, but again, moving an army and then also holding on to land. And again, empires are often a matter of incentive. There needs to be an incentive to not rebel, which is typically economic. um, that's where a lot of empires like hold themselves together, is effectively customs unions. So
And one of the things the Achaemenid Empire was famous for was their wealth, and they were not, they had an army they could go rock around and beat you to death with, but they were also just as happy to invest in your kingdom and rule if you would just swear fealty to them. And then they would literally give you money or give you experts. Oh, geez, you need some people that could build some farmland for you. Well, here, I've got 5,000 slaves I'll send over, and we'll get your farmland all set up.
yeah, and that's where like again, like empire building is typically one of like incentive versus disincentive. You want to make rebellion and independence disincentivized, which is typically where the army part of it comes in, and then you want to incentivize like membership. Um, so I can definitely see this being the emperor kind of like figuring that out, like playing like, okay, how do I do this again in a harder way? Like I don't think the emperor typically tends to go for the like the easy win. It's more like how far can I push humanity? How can I advance them? Like what little kind of like if you think of it as like kind of nipping and tucking and like, you know, shepherding towards something bigger. I think this is an example of like a very early example of like, okay, how do I overcome the challenges of being kind of like a coastal water based like empire? Can you push past that? And I think this is a great example of somebody who did, and then also ushered in like other advancements from that stability and from that platform. So no, I think it's also earlier on, so it can maybe even be the emperor maybe playing a little bit with like more lofty goals,
Yeah.
like the aesthetics and the the scientific element of it. Um, things like architecture, like we know like pre-heresy the imperial palace is beautiful, so obviously the emperor has some aesthetic consideration. So
I like
yeah,
it.
100%.
Yeah. Alrighty.
Good call, Reddit.
Yeah. Yeah. Way to go. Not so good on Tesla, but this was a good one.
Well, it's Reddit. Of course,
Yeah.
Tesla's gonna come out.
Yeah.
That's like I don't deal with Reddit. I don't know Reddit that well, but I feel like the one thing I know is that Tesla's popular there.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And I think our number one was probably no surprise to you either.
I think I was more surprised that it's not confirmed that the emperor was Genghis Khan.
Oh.
But that's a little bit of the, especially in the earlier, you can very much feel the like the British centrism of, not even British, English centrism of like 40K.
Yeah.
There's a yeah. I'm sure like the lack of diversity amongst the Primarchs, for example,
Sure.
shows there. Like, you know, yeah. Again, I'm more surprised that this doesn't make the list, because if you talk about like ridiculous like Civ 6 Empire strategies, Genghis Khan had the most ridiculous of them all.
The I'm going to conquer everybody strategy.
Yeah, like just, but also create both, like learn a lot of lessons on good ways to run an empire, but then also just like not have any follow through whatsoever, of just like, I'm gonna create this and then just see how long it takes to fall apart.
Yeah. Well, and if we, as we've been talking about all these different people, one of the themes that seems to be cropping up as we've been discussing things is the emperor trying something different, and certainly, he's conquered a lot of things, and Genghis Khan's certainly known for that. But one of the things that is different is, a huge chunk of Asia and Europe, the Eurasian steppes, is this giant, basically ocean-sized plains. How do you build an empire in a place where there are no cities? So maybe this is an attempt at, what do we do with these thousands and thousands of people that live in places that are they're basically mobile cities. And I think maybe this is him experimenting with this type of civilization, which, if he was Cyrus the Great, Cyrus the Great is killed by one of these horse archer civilizations, which is the Mongols are famous for. So maybe this is him maybe dabbling in this horse archer civilization to see how powerful it could be as either a weapon or something to build an empire with.
I mean, there's also maybe the darker, maybe he was just trying to spread the Black Death around and start over again. I don't know. That's also another possibility.
Well, now the Black Death comes much later than Genghis Khan. It's
no, but yeah. it's the empire created. It's the Mongol Empire that spreads that whole shebang.
Okay.
Yeah, it's where like the bubonic plague is. I think it's somewhere in India is where it originates from, and how it proliferated was like rats um, carrying it along shipments along the Mongol Empire, which eventually ended up in Europe and in the Middle East, and to devastating effect. Um, so I can also see the emperor like plaguing his own people just to see who will survive. You know that also fits. So
Sure. Now, I think the first, or at least in Europe, the first recording of the plague is from a Genoese um, trading vessel that was in the Black Sea. It was in it was at a city on the north coast on the Eurasian steppe that was sieged by the Golden Horde, I think, which is Genghis Khan's like great grandson or something like that, and
mm,
they were catapulting diseased corpses into the city, and the people that the Genoese traders that left there brought the plague to Europe through that. I think I'm pulling that. Maybe I'm pulling that out of my ass, but I think that's kind of how it
no, I don't mean
happens.
Genghis Khan is like and like I'm by no means saying like the Mongol Empire directly was trying to do that, but I can see like the emperor having that as like a like spin-off effect of like, okay, if I create this, what are the consequences? Maybe not necessarily like specifically like, hey, if I unleash the Black Death, like how bad will it be, but just to like what are the consequences of creating a giant empire in this type of like environment.
Yeah, and certainly they will aside even just from spreading disease around. Just their approach to warfare was devastating as well.
Yeah.
Go up to a city. Okay, do you surrender? No. Okay, we're going to kill everybody in your city then. But that's how they operated, which is ruthless even by the standards of that time.
But not ruthless by the standards of the emperor.
Nope, nope.
That sounds pretty tame
Yeah,
actually.
yeah.
um, the emperor will destroy your entire planet because one part of it won't comply. So um, that definitely fits in. Um, yeah, I
And the emperor as Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great conquered a lot of cities, and he was also had a reputation for being extraordinarily ruthless. Whenever he was besieging a city, if he happened to be wounded in battle while he was besieging a city, or they were particularly vexatious in terms of how long it took him to siege the city, he would murder almost everybody in the city after it was done.
yeah, I mean, yeah, and we know Alexander the Great was the emperor.
Yeah,
So yeah, that he's just going back to the oldies, the
yeah.
oldies but goldies of genocide.
You, you
Um,
can what's that? You can take the oh, I can't even pull the idiom out of my head now. Something about you can take the dog out of the, or you can't teach an old dog new tricks or something. Is that it?
yeah, I mean, yeah, you can take the megalomania out of the emperor, but he's still the emperor, and he's gonna just make more megalomania, maybe. Um, yeah, I think Genghis Khan is definitely one of those like, um, like fits very well. Um, the only thing that might be kind of like to maybe do the counterpoint is that there is a lot of similarities with like Alexander the Great. Um, and again, this could maybe be another situation of like the emperor maybe operating more from the shadows of, is the emperor necessarily Genghis Khan? No, but is the emperor involved with Genghis Khan? Yes. I can also see that being like a kind of a shadowy guiding someone.
Like his trusted advisor.
Yeah, like this might be more of an because again, like, does he want to do the same or a similar thing twice? No, but does he want to see like, can like a regular human be pushed to do something extraordinary?
Now I like that. So this is kind of a another play, only a more violent one on kind of the future Bismarck.
Yeah, like and like I said, I could also 100% see Genghis Khan being the emperor. I just can also see it being like a just because it rhymes again with Alexander the Great. I can see it being more of a like, can you guide someone? Like, can you inspire? Because realistically, um, like the fact that like Mongolia conquered as much of the world as they did is like extraordinary.
Yeah.
And it's like, is it the emperor leading them personally, or is it the emperor like pushing a people to do something like absolutely like out of bounds, like just mind blowing?
Yeah, I think it would fit better in the way you're thinking about it, where he's somebody in the background pushing them, because by the time
Yeah,
Genghis Khan is done, the Mongol Empire is really northern China and Mongolia. It's his son and grandson. They're the ones that make it the second largest empire ever in history, and it would make sense if the emperor is that guy in the background, the advisor, pulling the strings.
and maybe even takes the role, yeah, of the son or the grandson.
Yeah.
Um,
So like a
but
multi generational effort of being.
yeah,
Yeah.
like because yeah, again, I can 100% see that being like, can you guide, can you structure, can you create like this like almost um like extraordinary like family?
Hmm.
Because again, I think like the emperor, up until you know what 29th millennium is mostly in the background.
Yeah.
So if you think of like, okay, what is this guy doing this whole time? He's just learning. Like it's kind of like one huge experiment almost of like, what levers can I pull? Like, what can I learn? Because like realistically, like the Great Crusades happened very fast.
Yeah. Just
So
300
you
years
almost
or
have,
something.
yeah, like you almost have to have somebody who's like very well equipped with like everything you can like expect to happen and both go wrong. I mean, we also don't necessarily know like kind of talking about that like Leto the second uh inspiration, like is the emperor like prescient? Like does the emperor know like at this point like what's going to happen 40,000 years in the future?
Yeah. My personal theory is the emperor is much more like Leto the Second than other people think he is. I think he knows everything that's going to happen. I think he planned for the heresy to happen.
Mm.
I think he intended to be a dick to Angron. I think everything that happened was intentional in order to get to some future state, and he had to the heresy had to happen. He had to do his time on the throne, but at the end of it, in some unknowable future state that's as yet thousands of years into the future, or
Mm.
maybe 1 year in the future, we don't know. Something's going to happen, and everything that's happened leading up till then will enable humanity to not only survive it but thrive at the end of it. That's my
Well,
personal canon. Is he knows it all. He's Leto the second, golden path prescient.
actually, now that we're talking about things like like the Mongol Empire, like um if you're thinking on the time scale of a millennia is a short time period for the emperor.
Yeah.
um even from what we know of like the heresy, like even examples of like remembrancers and how a lot of the worlds are described, like there's a much higher quality of life in the Imperium in the early days.
Hmm.
You even look at like what happens to Caliban, like how quickly Caliban is like industrialized and modernized after the emperor arrives to meet the lion. Like that's in one of the books.
Yeah.
Like there's kind of these like profound jumps in like the human experience, but it's still very much like it's not the Imperium of 40K.
No.
Like the Imperium of 40K is very much a like nihilistic, military, like
It's a nightmare.
almost like hyper mobilized,
Yeah.
though. It's a purely like militarily focused machine that only serves war. That's all it does, which the Imperium of the Great Crusade is not. Even though the Great Crusade is happening, there's a tremendous amount of effort being put into war, but there is still time for arts and culture and architecture, and there are aesthetic concerns. There's like time, there is room for debate. Like even the Council of Nicaea happening is an example of like there was time for like political debate, even though that is was largely like a sham.
Yeah.
It still happened. It still occurred, and like the amount, like even that whole description of like the amount of effort that was put into, you know, create like freezing a volcanic planet into a stable shape just to show the power of the emperor is very much rooted in like a far more decadent society than the Imperium is. So like, does the emperor know that the Necrons are going to come back? Does the emperor know about Tyranids? And is the emperor just like, you know, is the heresy just an impetus to create a society that is so like desperate for survival, which is, you know, potentially his like whole overarching golden path, that, you know, effectively you need like 10,000 years of like, you know, conflicts with chaos to almost uh, sharpen them into a position where they can then handle like all the threats facing humanity.
Yeah. I like that. It's a multi-generational, um, like you said, way to just change society. Um, Not only to build something that's unified, but like you said, in a like a PTSD, you know, constant state of war and readiness. I like that. I like that way to think about it.
And I think like, you know, taking Genghis Khan as an example, like that's realistically taking society like as almost a microcosm, taking a society that was like largely like self-sufficient but also self-contained within a geography, and then just like blowing it up effectively into a massive empire. And then just like, it was that just kind of an experiment by the emperor to see like what happens,
Well,
you know.
and playing on that, there is a state where pre-unification Terra is just a bunch of warring kingdoms, and if you want to unify it all in a short period of time, what's the type of culture and people you need to build in order to, minus the technology, but just you need a certain cultural type of person, I think, in order to build an army that would have the mental fortitude to be capable to unify basically all of Earth in, I think, was it 30 years? Is that how long the unification wars took?
It's, yeah, I mean it's long in like a human sense, but it's not long in like a 40k sense.
Yeah.
um yeah, and I mean, like, you know, what do you need to have, how do you operate, like the value of speed in that, like there's a lot of expediency in that, and you know, what kind of compromises do you need to make, who do you keep, who do you get rid of, like how do you judge someone. So talking about like, you know, Bismarck's ability to like read people and like find out their utility to some greater cause, like that very much fits in with like unification and like basically ensconcing the High Lords of Terra. Like somebody like Genghis Khan, you can see where like uh, that like rapid empire building that the Great Crusade ends up being. You know, Margaret Thatcher's rapid transformation of a society. You can see that in kind of what happens. You know, Cyrus the Great, like that's a great example of you know, empire building when it's like difficult and like logistically complicated, which would represent more so like his retaking of like the Sol system and some of the closer star systems, like the kind of like pre-Primarch Great
Yeah.
Crusade,
Yeah.
like before he finds any of them.
Yeah.
Um, so no, I think like a lot of these actually fit in, except Nikola Tesla. Sorry. Uh,
Sorry, internet.
maybe St. Patrick. St. Patrick also doesn't fit into a lot of these themes.
I still like it, but
Um,
that's all right.
No, that's fair. I just like he just. I mean, it's almost like it's the use of religion. Like I can see St. Patrick being kind of playing with religion, but yeah, it doesn't fit into kind of the like Imperium building.
Well, and also, I mean, we know he's Saint George, and we know Saint George defeats the dragon, which he imprisons on Mars, which leads to the development of the cult mechanicum and the religion
Mm.
that he's able to exploit to be, to get the mechanicum on his side. Maybe there's something else happening with St. George that's similar to that, but not necessarily an exercise in empire building or religion building. Maybe he's um, defeating something that would have gotten in the way of future empire building.
Yeah, you know what? Now that I'm thinking about it more, it could also be an example because Ireland effectively is like fairly geographically isolated for large swaths of time, um, especially like post Roman Empire,
Mm-hmm.
like after the fall of Rome. Um, so maybe it's St. Patrick could be an example of more like cultural manipulation, like how can you shape like an isolated society, which again might come in more out of like what he did before like the Dark Age
Yeah.
of technology, of like what did he put in place amongst these like disparate human worlds so that they would like be somewhat usable when he'd be able to get back to them.
It's like Batman in his prep time. This is him, you know, prepping the future state worlds to be in some way enable them to kind of be the first domino that he flicks over and everything
Yeah,
falls into place.
because like realistically for the Great Crusade to happen, and I think it is talked about in the Crusade, like there are a lot of planets that just like they see imperial ships and they're just like, oh, this is great,
Yeah.
like reconnecting with humanity.
Yep.
Is someone like St. Patrick maybe like him figuring out like, okay, how do I build a society that can endure isolation more so and still be resilient?
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, realistically, Ireland after this point gets raided by Vikings for very long periods of time,
Yeah.
and just general like there's very little like large geographic trade. There's Ireland ends up being just kind of like very isolated, but then also very under threat. So you know what? The more I'm talking about it, the more I can see it. Not so much as like the empire building side of it, but more of the like cultural, like preservation viewpoint of like what are the like pillars you need to have in place to make sure that you don't just like descend or like collapse during hardship, but actually like thrive.
Yeah. And how do you get a isolated people prepped to integrate or join a larger
Yeah,
international community? Religion's
which
one
effectively
way.
the Catholicism does.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're both geographically isolated, but then you're still connected to like a central authority.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting. You know what? The more we've talked about it, I'm back on board.
All right. Good. Well, I'm glad we took a little bit extra time and backtracked a little bit.
There we go. Well, you got to summarize at the end,
Yeah.
right? We got to prove the thesis that we know what we're talking about.
Speaking of which, as hosts of our show, I asked you ahead of time, do you have somebody maybe not in this list that you think maybe could have been on this list? Who do you like anybody, throughout history or maybe, even fantasy or fiction to maybe have been the emperor of mankind?
I can actually see like Socrates
Yeah.
being the emperor.
Yeah.
Again, you know what? It kind of blends in with that. Maybe what like St. Patrick was trying to accomplish, like what the emperor could be trying to accomplish as St. Patrick, of creating like enduring cultural contributions.
Yep. I really like that. Yeah.
Yeah, like realistically, but Socrates also like acts very indirectly. Like he himself doesn't do a lot. It's what everyone else did around him. It's like maybe the emperor playing with like how his presence and his thinking and thoughts and like gets distributed out to humanity in a way, and like, you know, is his like talking to Plato, um, sort of a way for the emperor to see like, okay, how does this play out if I let people into like my wisdom almost.
Yeah, and certainly, I don't think you'll find. I mean, Socrates for people who love 40K and are just kind of ethereally aware that there was a philosopher called Socrates. Socrates, um, seen as the founder of Western philosophy, he taught Plato, who of course taught Aristotle, and Aristotle, a lot of people would make very strong arguments, and I think they'd be right that a lot of basically Western thinking can be driven back to Aristotle, who of course is a student of Plato, who's a student of Socrates. So it's a way to flick that first domino, maybe, in something that builds over thousands of years, effectively.
Well, I mean, it extends further than that. Like, the Stoics were big fans of Socrates. So, like, Epictetus, who was largely plagiarized by like early Christians in the formation of like the philosophy that accompanied Christianity,
Mm-hmm.
was like, you know, Stoics basically worshipped Socrates almost, as and a lot of that got subsumed. Like Seneca, very much Marcus Aurelius, who I actually don't think would be the emperor, just because the emperor doesn't tend to be the emperor tends to be more pointed, whereas Marcus Aurelius was like a broader person.
Mm-hmm.
But he is very much inspired by Socrates, and like, um, so again, I think like Socrates could be an example of someone who's like it's not even just like the reverberations happen in so many different directions in so many different ways that I can see that being like a very early attempt of the emperor. Like, okay, let's steer from the shadows for the next like 8,000 years.
Yeah, I really like that pick. I think that's a fantastic one.
Well, now what's yours? Because I've put the pressure on now.
Mine, mine's a little bit more back into the conqueror or world building, empire building person. But you touched on a while back about the, I mean, 40K is written by people largely Western, and live a lot of them living in Great Britain. So the emperor has been, like you said, a lot of Western figures. But I like a guy by the name of al-Malik. And al-Malik, he was a caliph of the Umayyad Caliphate, which was the first Muslim empire that kind of rose out of the initial expansion of the Muslim empire out of the Arabian Peninsula. So I like Abdal Malik because even though he's the fifth kind of emperor or caliph, when he takes the throne, the empire's basically falling apart. The expansion out of the Saudi Arabia conquered a massive chunk of the world in a very, very short period of time, basically one generation. But it was in the middle of a civil war because there was dozens, if not hundreds, of different cultures and languages, and even though it was the Muslim expansion, they didn't really do a good job of unifying people with the Muslim religion. Abd al-Malik, not only is he a conqueror, he unifies, he puts down all these revolts and basically stitches the empire back together. But much like our first Chinese emperor or other people, he enforces standards. He enforces a new Muslim coinage. He enforces the Muslim religion. He enforces the language of that's spoken in Saudi Arabia as kind of the official language that everybody should speak when they're teaching the Muslim religion, and then he helps, even though it was the text had actually only been written down and standardized, I think, just a generation earlier, but it wasn't actually pushed out anywhere. He made sure, if you had a copy of the Quran in Egypt, it was the same copy of Quran somebody had in Pakistan, which up until he took control wasn't the case. There were different versions of the Quran around, and some of it was in different languages. So he standardizes all that stuff, unifies, an empire bigger than what it had been under one religion, one language, enforces the culture on all these different people, and sets up, a massive Muslim religion and culture and way of thinking that persists even till today. So that's why I like Abd al-Malik, just because it's another way to build an empire, using religion, using language, and standardized weights and measures, but also this other way of doing it too. And I think that was kind of a neat way to do it. And it's hard to argue that there isn't a massive influence of that even today, from hundreds and hundreds of years ago.
I also like this one, and I think talking about standardization and that, but even just fitting into kind of the theme of like the emperor trying different kind of political, socioeconomic, like cultural, like every like religious context, and trying to kind of like turn them to kind of whatever he's trying to do. We've talked a lot about like building empires, but this is more of a situation of somebody like solidifying an empire.
Yeah.
And
yeah, and sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, like, it's you're not the Julius Caesar in this example. You're more of like the Octavian. Like you're the person who actually like brings structure to, the government and society, but in like a very temperamental position. So yeah, I can definitely see that being, the emperor playing more with that like context, which again I think echoes into like the Great Crusade.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, Abdal, building the empire that becomes solidified, like you said, Abd al-Malik's son, he's the one that leads the Muslim invasion of Spain, which gets stopped by Charlemagne's father when it tries to get into France. So, his son, extends the Muslim empire to as big as it will ever be, but he builds that engine that enables an expansion that exists till today. It's crazy.
Yeah, and I think that's very like, again, seeing kind of like, okay, how do you change the course of history? How do you impact it? How do you effectively like increase the likelihood of survival of humanity? That's really like that's the emperor's one and only goal.
Yeah.
Is just like the survival of humanity. And I think we've seen even within like what we were talking about like the role of the heresy, like part of it is both like conflict and friction, and then also like structure and order, but then also like stability and a little bit of chaos mixed in there. But I mean, if we talk about like the emperor as a god of order,
yep.
All empire builders typically what they're trying to do, at least whether or not they do it effectively, like, but what they think they're doing is like instating order, typically.
Yep.
And I mean that very much fits the MO of the emperor. So no, I like that one. That makes sense.
All right. Well, thanks so much. I've really enjoyed having you on the podcast. It was great to nerd out and not only talk a little history, but talk a lot of lore. And I loved it. It was a great time.
Yeah, and I guess I'll do the self-promotion thing. If you've enjoyed listening to me rambling, the Chaos Divided podcast, it's with myself and Nurgle Snurgle, and it's mostly just us like joking around. And I know you normally have a more serious podcast.
Yeah.
When I listen, it's a little more rigorous. So if you're looking for something a little lighter, then check out Chaos Divided, And yeah, again, thank you so much for having me on, and this has been an absolute blast. And maybe I'll get invited in again if I didn't do too bad a job.
No, you did awesome, and I think when I get to the end of my Warhammer 40K season, I'll look to do something special and see if I can get you involved in that. See if we can nerd out about the lore a little more.
Well, there we go. Well, thank you so much.
Awesome, thank you very much. And for everybody who might have missed it, what's your podcast again?
It's Chaos Divided.
Chaos Divided. It's awesome. I love that. I love your podcast. It's great. Everybody should check it out. Even if you don't like, not necessarily a fan of Warhammer 40,000, it's just a type of show that leaves you with a good feeling and a smile on your face.
Aw, that's what we're going for.
Yeah, it's great. All right. Thank you very much. Thanks everybody for listening. It's been a great time. Once again, thank you everybody who listened to our podcast and who took the time to download the podcast as we've gotten it off the ground these last few months. This podcast isn't possible without fans who like history and who like fiction and just talking about it a little bit. And I hope you enjoyed these 2 bonus episodes we did. It was just an excuse to have fun and talk a little bit more, fanboy out a little bit on our topic of our season 1. And we'll look to get back to our regular schedule podcasts at the start of the first of every month. So thank you very much for listening, everybody, and I hope you had a good time. Bye-bye.